History remembers this place for a question. He was running, a hunted man, imprisoned, tortured, and condemned, not for a crime of violence, but simply for what he believed. He was an Anabaptist, and his name was Dirk Willems. Somehow, Dirk escaped from prison. The castle moat, just here, was frozen, and he fled across the thin ice. Freedom was within his grasp, and then his pursuer fell through, and Dirk Willems turned back. He recrossed the treacherous ice and saved the very man who would lead him to the fire of his execution. Why did Dirk Willems turn back? That question, why did Dirk Willems turn back, is one that takes us 500 years into the past. I'm Reagan Schrock. With historical theologian Dean Taylor and church history teacher Stephen Russell, we traveled across Europe to the actual sites where the Anabaptist story unfolded, from Zurich, Switzerland to the lowlands of the Netherlands. Across 10 episodes, we traced the first 100 years of a movement that refused the sword, even when it cost them everything, and followed Jesus even when following Jesus was fatal. This is Anabaptist Origins. So this single act of mercy that Dirk Willems did just right over there in that moat, it's outlasted empires. But the big question is, why did Dirk Willems turn back?
Well, one possible way of answering that is that he was an Anabaptist. But what does that mean? What does it mean to be an Anabaptist? And that's what our series is going to be looking at as we go on.
Yeah, I think to even answer the question, we need to go back further in time. We need to go back to the time of Christ, to the time of the Roman Empire, and even to look to see what was going on in Europe at the time when the Anabaptists came on the scene. And to do that, we should go to some of those locations that gives us the context that led to this event here. To understand why Dirk Willems turned back, we need to go back 2,000 years, way before any cathedral. You see, Dirk Willems was an Anabaptist, and historians usually date the beginning of Anabaptism to 1525. But the Anabaptists would not have wanted to consider themselves as starting the church in 1525. Rather, they saw themselves as part of the faith that was handed to them from the apostles. They were people of Jesus Christ, who was trying to put the plan of Jesus, his plan for humanity, into practice. There was another empire that was started at that time around the architect of Augustus Caesar. And we came to this amazing spot to talk about that very thing. We are here at the Hermann Denkmal. In 9 AD, this is the place that the Roman army had their greatest defeat. It was here that under the general Arminius, a general that was trained by the Roman army, turned their tactics into an ambush that lasted for 3 days that ended up costing 3 different Roman legions. It was a terrible defeat for Rome. In the ancient histories of Augustus, it's actually recorded that in mourning, he would grow his beard out and just kept saying, "Varus, give me my legions." Well, that other kingdom, the kingdom that was started in a manger and led to the apostles, grew. But it grew by martyrdom. It grew by humility and amazing, from different cultures and different languages and different ways. The message of Jesus, its simple ways, took over an empire until finally it grew and it grew and it grew to a place that finally the empire said, we're going to use this for our means. And that's the change that happened. St. Augustine gives us this in his book, The City of God, this idea of the city of God and the city of man. And even in his book, he's wrangling of how to combine these together. And different ones have written about this. In his book, The City of God, he actually says this about the two. He says, accordingly, the two cities have been formed by two loves. The earthly by the love of self, even to the contempt of God. The heavenly by the love of God, even to the contempt of self. Yes, those tensions between the city of God and the city of man are ancient. And Augustus never figured it out either. And so through time, the cross and its kingdom went in a way of sacrifice and peace. The empire has also tried to use military strength, and when it could, any religion it could, to force its power over people. Matter of fact, why this place was built was actually for a different reason. Not just the defeat over Roman, but right here in this very area also was a man by the name of Charlemagne. And Charlemagne, Charles the Great, actually conquered the German pagans, but his way was very brutal. And he did it under the name of Christianity. In the 700s, Charlemagne led the Saxon Wars, forcing the pagans to convert to Christianity. He forced them into baptisms, and if they would not convert to his form of Christianity, the sentence was death. And this kind of thing, it continued for centuries. As a matter of fact, not far from here, in the town of Verdun, Charlemagne had massacred 4,500 people for not accepting his imperial gospel. Now, I wish that I could say that people don't behave this way anymore, that these are just remnants of the past, of ignorant people who didn't know better. But here's the problem. Without repentance, without a genuine change, the same theology, given similar circumstances, often creates the similar results. A little over 1,000 years from the time that Charlemagne was massacring his people here, the Germanic people put up the statue with the sword up to heaven and the sign over the defeat over the Roman people as a sign of the rising of the Germanic people that were here. And that idea, Hermann the German, which is what this represented this mix of church and state and military power in a way that affected the nations again. These empires will come, they fell, but the church is still praying the same. The church is still living the faith that was handed to them from the apostles. And still to this day, the plan for humanity given to us from Jesus Christ is meant to change the world in a positive way.
On Christmas Day in the year 800, the Pope crowned Charlemagne as Emperor of the Romans. This Holy Roman Empire, as it was later called, endured for over 1,000 years. Its emperors had an ever-shifting relationship with the church, and it was within this tangled imperial world that the Reformation and the Anabaptist movement arose. In the Reformation era, the emperors of this sprawling realm mostly came from the Habsburg dynasty. They ruled from the city of Vienna, now in modern-day Austria.
Well, here we are in Vienna, the heart of the Habsburg Empire, but this is a really good image for some of the things that happened. In the early days, the church was very focused on following Jesus, doing what he had told them to do. And in fact, during that time, they were persecuted by the Roman Empire. And then around the 300, Constantine became emperor, and gradually there started to be a change where the church and the state started coming closer and closer together. Eventually, this brought a lot of corruption. In fact, the church reached the pinnacle of its power in 1200, where almost every prince and king in Europe owed allegiance to the Pope. So it went from a persecuted people to a people that were eventually considered part and parcel of the Roman Empire and its goals.
So let's go further back, Mr. Russell. How was this originally? How did this all start for the church, and what, especially the early church, in contrast to what we're seeing here?
Well, I would like to go the whole way back. And God, who is love, freely created the world so he could share his love with creatures. Unfortunately, we fell. But God, who is love, sent his son, who lived, died, and rose again to give us new life. And it's out of that the church starts. In AD 30, roughly, at Pentecost, the Spirit comes and fills the people who are the church. And from that point on, there's a dynamic expansion of the church, not just in the Roman Empire, but beyond that. And at the very first, the Romans opposed the church. They felt that it was undermining their empire. But when we finally get to Constantine, that changes.
Following that whole Constantine era, the radicals still existed. The true believers of Jesus and followers of Jesus still existed in history. It's just very difficult to find, because one of the problems is that only the writings, usually of their persecutors, are the ones that we have their writings. Through the ages, there's been these people within the Catholic Church, outside the Catholic Church, within, not necessarily in this group or that group, but just people wanting to follow the teachings of Jesus and trying to walk it out. Let's go get a cup of coffee and just mention a few of the significant ones.
I want to give a little backdrop of where we're sitting before we continue with the conversation we're having over there. So we look that way, that's the gateway into the palace complex for what would have been the Habsburg Empire. This is old city square, it goes back to Roman times, right? But right across from it, maybe we'll walk over there and look at it, that there's a cathedral, or a church called St. Michael's Church. You about can't get a more clear picture of church and state fused together, because this was the seat of the government. This is the Habsburg Empire. This is where you enter into the palace complex, and right there is this church, going back to the 1200s. It really symbolizes exactly what we've been talking about, and how did we get to this point. So anyway, I want to lay that for some groundwork of that's what we're looking at, and that's kind of what we're thinking about with this episode, that fusion of church and state. So we gave some of the backdrop there. Pick up the story from there. What happens next?
The mistake that we could do as historians is to think like the church disappears, and then like suddenly Martin Luther brings it all back in the 1500s. The fact is, through all time since the Pentecost, Jesus has promised us the church would never fail. And so there's been these believers, gatherings always, in all different places through them. It's difficult sometimes to find the records. It's many times, what we have is just what their enemies said of them. And they usually want to try to make it sound as bad as possible. And we could even do some historical things and see that, that was definitely an exaggeration. But some of those are significant, and it does show a theological problem. And that is that combination of the church and state. And with that came a power and a coercion that was just very ugly. And this happened all across the Christian world. It happened both in the Roman Catholic sections, it happened in the Byzantine Orthodox places as well. When we look at the historic account of how the church responded to people who thought differently, it's kind of sad. For example, the Balkans, there was a movement called the Bogomils, and they taught a simple faith centered on Christ's teaching. We do know that. They were branded heretics, but unfortunately most of what we know of them comes from their persecutors. We do know they rejected infant baptism, icons, and military service. And for this, they were condemned by the Orthodox Church. And as a matter of fact, in 1100s, 2 Cappadocian bishops had enough of this state church system and left. And they were branded as heretics. And they actually had a regional synod at Constantinople in 1143 that the rulings of that regional synod called for their execution to be burned at the stake. These kind of things continue to go on. Here in the West, there was the gatherings of the Waldensians. Now, one thing with the Waldensians, it's not always just one people. Many times, and when you're looking into this time period, the Waldensians have become kind of a label. And the classic story of Peter Waldo and wanting to preach. And the early records, we have actually the accounts where he's not wanting to rock the boat with very much at all. And I just want to preach. I just want to go and preach the gospel. I want to be poor. I want to walk around and tell people about Jesus. That later came and developed, and as those groups came out from him, and others that gathered like that were branded Waldensians. And the West, the Roman Catholic churches of the West suppressed this movement, and ones that were related to it really surprisingly strongly.
Peter Waldo did request the possibility of preaching. His own bishop said no.
Right.
He did appeal to the Pope, and the Pope said yes, if your local bishop okays it. And Waldo and his friends were not willing to do that, and so they went against church authority. And then you come maybe 30, 40 years later, and we get to Francis of Assisi. And he wanted to serve God as well. He went to the Pope and he asked for this permission. He was denied twice and eventually allowed to do it. So he was willing to obey, but persistent. He started a new order which operated within the church. This was desperately needed because there wasn't an established seminary system.
Right.
Some men who wanted to be priests went to the university,
Right.
and they usually were well trained, but a lot of them were trained by their own village priest, and there's going to be a decline in
Right.
the ability to preach, etc. And so there was a need. Around 1200, there was a big need for preaching, and Francis met that need. And whenever anybody heard about a Franciscan in the nearby village, they'd go down and say, you need to come to us next. They wanted to hear God's word preached. They knew the story, but they wanted to hear the scriptures laid out for them.
Right.
So Francis was extremely important to actually helping the Christians in Europe understand better what their faith was. The Black Death came in the middle 1300s. Many of the other priests fled the cities out of fear. The Franciscans tended to stay and take care of their people, and they suffered an immense number of deaths.
So we go from there. Let's take it to England, and let's go to John Wycliffe. And we're starting to get the Word of God. We're starting to get some things coming out where people are wanting. We've got to somehow get these scriptures in our hand. Tell us a little bit about John Wycliffe.
Well, Wycliffe is very interesting. He was a professor at Oxford, and so he was reading the Bible, not in Greek and not in Hebrew. He was reading the Vulgate, the Latin Bible, and he came to see at least 4 areas where the church was wrong. One of them was he emphasized that there are 2 kingdoms. Now, he didn't think about it the way we do. He said there are 2 kingdoms. The one is the secular, the other is the ecclesiastical, and they should never overlap.
Right.
They were all overlapped completely in the Middle Ages. So that was one critique he had, that they should not be overlap, and when they do, they lose their authority. So the Catholics actually ruling little city-states was wrong. That was his first point. There are 2 kingdoms. They shouldn't overlap. Then he said, there are the elect, and only the elect go to heaven. And but we don't know who they are. But we have some clues, and one clue is, once again, this is the Middle Ages, poverty. And who are the poor people in the Middle Ages?
Yeah, it's all the peasants.
The peasants.
Yeah.
And so Wycliffe wasn't saying no nobleman, I guess anyway, was
Interesting.
elect, but it's a guess that mostly the elect are the peasants. Who is not elect? The wealthy church.
Right.
Okay?
So they probably didn't like that when
No,
he said that.
probably didn't, is right. Well, the rulers and the church people could read Latin, but if the peasants are the elect, they need the Bible in their language. The Bible is for God's people. God's people are the elect. Probably most of them are the peasants. So separation of the 2 kingdoms, and once again, he didn't mean it the 2 kingdoms the way we do, and the elect need to have the Bible in their language. So he translated the Bible into English. All those things kind of went okay. And then finally he said, I do not believe in transubstantiation. And that's the Catholic teaching that the bread and the wine become the body and blood of Christ. And that's how you receive Christ. That was a step too far. Just think about it. If this is how I think I receive receive Christ, and he says that nothing is happening there, that he lost his backing by the nobles, and he was sent away from Oxford and went to a little parish church and died there.
I mean, talk about church and state together. This Habsburg palace is
You
amazing.
can't get a more striking visual on this than here.
Wow.
This being the old city center that is, from Roman times. So when they were relaying the tiles, they kept finding like old Roman road underneath. Yeah. So this would be like the gateway into the palace complex, and sort of an old government building. Right here's the St. Michael's, which this plaza is actually named after this church. So St. Michael's Church here, you can see Michael striking down.
It looks like he's defeating Satan.
But for context, when we were back there at the cafe, you were telling us about John Wycliffe and how he's saying, wait, God's word for all people, and what happens next. Again, this is kind of the context that he's coming from. This is what would be normal. This church is from like the 1200s. It's quite old. What happens next at that point?
So, Wycliffe had disciples, and this whole preaching of the poor, I love that you brought that out. They went through, and then also people from the Czech Republic, modern day Czech Republic, the Bohemian areas there, came and studied there at Oxford, and they would have encountered these teachings still to that day, and they were called the Lollards, which it was kind of a derogatory word, just like we were called the Anabaptists. It was named by their inmate, and most people think it means something like murmuring or stammering, nonsense.
Oh, that's mean.
That's kind of mean. And so they took this message and it started to gain ground in the modern day Czech Republic area, and that was significant. And one of the person that caught on to this was Jan Hus. And he began to read the scriptures, to preach, and he was an amazingly popular preacher. People would just flock into his church to hear him preach, and he was preaching upon the Word of God. He talked about things, more of a reform that was needing to come. He also had some very things he wanted to talk about, that the sacrament, even the mechanical way of the sacrament, that the Bible says it should be in two kinds. And at the time, this was a very important thing. They were making it where, if it's the real presence and it's all within the wafer, then why would you need to waste your time drinking the wine when you just take the wafer?
What era is this? Like, when's he preaching?
He was burned at the stake in 1415.
So a few hundred years, say, after this church is built, for perspective. Then.
Okay, yeah.
So he's going against, standing up to institutions that are extremely old and established.
I don't know, when I study that Czech area, you have the people that follow are very radical followers of Jesus. You hear pockets of non-resistance in the different movements that follow after him. And it just brings in things that are challenging this concept of Christendom. And that, can't we get back to the simple teachings of Jesus? Can't we have what the Bible teaches us? Even in the sacraments, he's making these kind of challenges. And those types of things begin to catch on.
So we're walking through an area that would really illustrate the power of empire at the time. And yet we look at this, and so Habsburg Empire, right? Which doesn't exist anymore. What happened? And there were ideas and things that were starting to spread that very much outlasted this empire and the church-state situation they had going on here. Mr. Russell, tell us about some of that. What was one of the key pieces of technology at the time that really made a difference in the flow and spread of ideas?
Mm-hmm. Well, up until in the middle 1400s, everything that was printed had to be done by hand.
Right.
Manuscripts were printed, and that meant that new ideas went out very slowly. The books were expensive. Probably the persons who would buy them would be either wealthy people or people who went to university. Mm-hmm. But in the middle of 1400s, the printing press was developed. Took a bit of time. Because of that, though, all of a sudden you could print large numbers of books and sell them for a small price. At least relatively speaking.
Reasonable price.
And so
compared to doing it all by hand, right?
So yes. So the ideas of Wycliffe went down to Bohemia, and Hus was not quite as radical as Wycliffe, mm-hmm. but he thought these ideas should be discussed. It was because of but they couldn't be at that time, not widely. His effect, Hus's effect, was on Bohemia alone, mm-hmm. because they spoke the same language. The ideas could be spread within that small area. But once the printing press comes, people can start to buy books, not just the Bible, but buy various books, and they can hear what kinds of things are being discussed. They printed books, but they also printed little pamphlets. And I think it's kind of interesting. In a way, that was the internet of their day.
Yeah.
And so, for instance,
yeah.
If we would be in a little village, I would point to the little store in the middle of the village, and they had, in English, they're called chapmen. And a chapman was a guy that sold books and pamphlets and traveled around. So one day, the chapman would come in and he would sell the latest writing of Luther. And the storekeeper would probably buy it, and then he would read it to all the villagers would come together, he'd read it to them, and they'd start discussing it.
Wow.
Maybe 2 weeks later, he'd come back the other way, and a Catholic had responded. Now he had the Catholic response.
You're talking like
so,
old style of almost like internet forums discussions. I mean, but kind of, right?
Kind of, yeah.
Okay, because this is really important because when they're writing some of these new ideas, pre-Reformation, when Reformation starts, they're going up against this. I mean, this established, like, it feels very permanent. How could you ever question this, awesome display of power? And yet, it's gone now. The Holy Roman Empire is gone.
It's a good comparison. I like you brought the tracts thing because, when you're like reading the early Reformation, so when Martin Luther, the famous act of putting his thesis on the Wittenberg door, the next day that was taken and put into these little tract forms and it went viral.
Wow.
If it wasn't for this kind of small little, easily to get things to press, probably Reformation wouldn't have caught on so quickly.
It would have probably stayed a lot more local.
And it wasn't just the pamphlets. Okay, so not everybody could read, but the priests would get this and they would be drawn one way or the other. And so you would start to hear stuff preached over the pulpit. Even if you couldn't read.
The Word of God comes with a promise. It's a living book. And so when people were allowed to have scriptures or discussions about scriptures, it woke up a world that said, wow, another way is possible. We could live these teachings of Jesus. We could live like this. Why are we not? And I agree with you. I think that was one of the primary things that led up to the Reformation that caused the world to see things differently.
So one of the things I love about being in some of these old European cities is you come across stuff like this. This is a bit of a visual anchor for what you were just telling us about, Mr. Russell, with this spread of new ideas, the printing press, and people like questioning some things. How do we do this? And well, maybe that should change, and so on. And what was some of the early thinkers and writers that were really taking advantage of that around this time, and the effect that they had on church life and even the whole church-state thing we've been talking about?
Well, originally, probably the vast majority was Bible or some kind of devotional book. And that makes me think about the Imitation of Christ. That would have been written right around the same time, and I'm sure that became a very popular book to print. And even today, it's probably the most popular devotional book in the world. But anyway, the guy who really takes it and uses it at first anyway is Erasmus. He gets together all of the Greek manuscripts he can find and does a critical edition of the Greek New Testament. He also gives some paraphrases. He also gives some commentary. And this goes out. It can go out to anybody just about, because it's printed on the printing press. So it's cheaper and a lot of copies are done at one time. A Bible would take a whole year for one man to do it. Think about that. This is a very short time period to do a Bible or a New Testament or whatever. So Erasmus puts together the first edition of the Critical New Testament that was actually published. The Catholics actually had printed one earlier, but they were checking it so thoroughly that he got his out first. He got a hold of theirs when it came out and used it to correct his original because they had more manuscripts than he did. So this is really important. And Erasmus was a committed Catholic, I think, but he cared about the corruption of the church. And so he makes fun of the Pope, Julius II.
Really?
Who, Julius II was known for sitting on his war horse in armor more than being in front of an altar.
Wow.
He took the name Julius from Julius Caesar.
Yeah.
So what era are we talking that Erasmus lived then?
He and the early reformers are contemporaries.
Okay.
So they buy his New Testament and they read it and they find little things or big things. One of them is, this is the one I always bring up, one of them is, at the beginning of both Matthew and Mark, it says, Jesus says, repent for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And in the Latin Bible, it said, do penance because the kingdom of God is at hand.
Oh my, that's a big
difference.
That's
And people, there were other things, but that maybe was the most important one. There were a lot of other things we could bring with that. So Erasmus provides the sort of the springboard for people who are concerned and think that the church is corrupted. Some of them get a bit of humor from his humorous writings about See, he has Julius II die. He's still alive. He has him die in one of his books and come up to the pearly gates and with his spear tap on probably pound on the gates of heaven. And St. Peter looks down and says, "Who are you?" And he says, "I'm Pope Julius." He says, "You don't look like a pope." So anyway,
You can imagine how that would have went viral.
Yeah. Wait a minute. How did he get away with this? You said he's a Catholic, and
yeah.
So here's like a church that maybe been around 100, 200 years before. He's writing all this stuff, and you can just imagine. Okay, this is a solid, stable institution that's been here for a really long time, and if someone comes along and starts writing stuff like this, while still being part of that, right? So being a Catholic, what were the ramifications? Like was he able to actually do this?
Many people weren't putting their names or their dates or their publishers. And I believe that this is called, the book that I'm talking about is called In Praise of Folly.
Which you can still get and read.
Oh, yes, you can get it all the time.
Yeah.
I don't think he put his name, but the style and everything, everyone knew it was him, but you couldn't really pin it on him.
He was bold then.
Oh, yeah.
Really taking advantage of what was the mass media of the day, essentially, with the printing press.
Well, and then when he does his Greek New Testament, and then when Luther and Zwingli get a hold of it and start translating, the more conservative Catholics throw a kind of an accusation at Erasmus. You haven't left the Catholic Church. But they would say, you laid the egg that Luther hatched. And this is very true. This gave Luther a definite, clear indication of what the original said. This is our foundational document for the church. Erasmus wasn't the only one who knew things had to change. There were a lot of them were amused at what he had done to the Pope. I kind of poked at him.
This is the Renaissance, so back to the sources was the cry.
Yeah.
And setting it up, in 1453. The Ottomans took over Constantinople. And in there was lots of different of the ancient manuscripts from not just biblical writers, but also the classics and that type of a thing. And when that was taken over by the Ottomans, those documents started to come into circulation, and it caused an excitement. And so now here you have Erasmus, like you're saying, showing us the sources of the main source of all things, the Bible. People were like, wow, so you mean we can actually dig in deeper? And like you're saying, Zwingli and Luther, we have their revelations of when they're getting a hold of that they could actually read the ancient texts like this.
I'm starting to see how significant this is because, as we'll see in following episodes with the first Anabaptists, they're just constantly saying, go back to Scripture, go back to Scripture. Yeah. What does the Scripture say? Oh, I know the city council wants us to do this, but show me in the Bible? Yeah. And that would have been, say, 100 years before, or even less. If you didn't have these translations, it would have been very hard to do that. And basically it's giving these new thinkers material to actually process. And what does the Bible say?
And then it gives the people, the common people, access to. Because they started translating the Bible into the language of the common people. We often don't know this, but it forced the Catholics to do the same.
Right.
They had to translate their own. They did their own translation. As soon as the first English Bible came out, or Protestant Bible, well, maybe not quite right away, but soon after, the Catholics that had been expelled from England because England was becoming Protestant, they were in what we call Belgium today, and they started translating the first English Catholic Bible.
Basically, they see which way the wind is blowing, so to speak. This is what people are asking for. This. There's all this new stuff coming to the surface, and it's like, oh, we have to deal with this. Yeah. What do we do with this Erasmus guy? Which, again, I'm amazed he could start questioning big institutions like this and actually get away with it. It's kind of hard for me to believe.
Not a lot of Catholics, and even not a lot of Protestants, could read. I mean, there were a large number who couldn't. But one of the things the Anabaptists did was they would teach their people how to read because they really wanted each one to have a Bible, or at least a New Testament that he could read, and then you could get together, you can discuss it. It was very early on expected among the Anabaptists that everyone got a Bible if he could afford it. And and they taught them how to read. Before a lot of them knew how to read, they would teach them, the Anabaptist leaders would teach them important scriptures, like the Great Commission. so that when they were asked questions by either the Catholics or the Protestants, they could quote Scripture. And sometimes the people that were asking them, why are you an Anabaptist? Why are you doing this? They were amazed that these guys, even though they couldn't read, they could quote Scripture. So that's how important it was for the Anabaptists. Before somebody learned how to read, they taught him Scripture by memorization, and then they wanted everyone to have a Bible or at least a New Testament if possible.
And then what's fascinating, once the common people started to look at these Bible verses and read these scriptures, it starts a whole different world of questions you ask. Up until the Middle Ages and past the Middle Ages, very detailed explanations on different kind of very speculative theology was just common everywhere. And now people were able to ask some very simple questions like, so Jesus talks about this, living this life of poverty, or he talks about giving to the poor, or he talks about loving your enemies. And so that raised the question to the common people, well, what about this simple stuff? And I think Erasmus himself, you're seeing that people oftentimes call him a humanist, and it's not in the sense of a secular humanist, but just talking about the human person and how these things of social justice and different things that the people were caring about, that he was able to speak to that. And that resonated with them. The other thing that I think was very impressive with Erasmus and the early ones is in the things about the sacraments, and that was a lot of what the debates were over. And one of the things that kind of rose to the surface was faith. So the idea that was in church history was you wanted to get away from the idea that a minister or a person would have to be perfect for the sacraments to work. So they were very concerned that you would say, oh, if the minister has sin in his life, well then that sacrament didn't work. And they would quote ancient councils of the Donatists and between fights with Augustine and that kind of a thing. So there was this big teaching that, no, it's beyond the person having to be perfect. But it began to develop in this Latin phrase, ex opere operato, which by the act, it happens. So no matter what, it literally became mechanical. And so that was really a lot with the defense of infant baptism, a defense of the way they would do their ordinations. And so even if during all the Middle Ages in both the East and the West, when there's very clear documented payoffs to be bishop and archbishop and that kind of a thing, well, ex opere operato. We still went through all the rite, we did all the things proper, so God had to act in that in a sacrament because of his word and his promises to that. They began to challenge this and said, without faith, how can we have just an empty mechanical type of thing? And this was one of the challenges that Erasmus and others, and it wasn't just Luther, it wasn't just the Protestants, there was many within the Catholic Church that were rising up and asking us, how can we just do this mechanically like this?
So we've been seeing the conditions in Europe of that fusion of church and state. And we started this episode with the story of Dirk Willems. And we want to end it in that same place and tell what happens next and the rest of his story. And I just want to point out, this is a recent excavation, but they found the castle where he was held as a prisoner that he escapes from. And you can't really see it, it's kind of overgrown right now, but this is the old castle wall, and it runs along here, and it's still being excavated, but that's only in the last few years.
Dirk Willems was lived in Asperen, and he had been baptized as a young man into the Anabaptist faith, and it was known that he was an Anabaptist. But what happened is King Philip of Spain had recently become not just the king of Spain, but also the ruler of the Netherlands. His father had passed an edict which said that you can't change your religion. That's not permissible.
Right.
And Philip really enforces that rule. Dirk Willems is a known Anabaptist,
right, but
now the authorities are ordered to not allow anyone to be of a religion other than Catholicism. The authorities took him and they put him in prison here at the castle, which is right down here. We're actually probably walking in where it originally was.
Like maybe the courtyard, perhaps. Yeah.
And there was a moat all the way around this.
And some of this water back here is still part of that original moat. It's not just kind of a pond, but the historian was telling us, yeah, that is part of that original
In that
moat.
ancient picture, you see both the moat around the castle itself and then the bigger moat around the entire city wall.
So after he was taken prisoner, he was probably given some help by a sympathetic worker in the castle to get away. And our local historian told us, we know for sure that he headed out in this direction.
In that direction.
So that means that this part of the moat, which is still here, is where he crossed the frozen, lightly frozen, but frozen moat, got on the other side, and could have escaped to the next city or next town if he wanted to. But then he realized that the man that was following him fell through. And he stopped and he came back and he saved that man's life. Both of them got on the other shore. The bailiff, who was the thief catcher's boss, was on this side, and he told him, you have to keep him. He's broken the law, and you have to keep him. And so the thief catcher did.
So just 200 yards back that way is the castle ruins and where Dirk Willems is recaptured. And they bring him here to this church. As far as we know, there's a prison up in the top.
Well, this is where Willems was held after he was recaptured.
He tries to escape, and he was in the castle, right?
Right.
And most likely, as far as we can tell, brought to this spot right here, which I asked before, is this the old door from back then? It's not, 1700s, so a little bit after
this is
Dirk, but
1700s too.
Same with the stocks. But it's really accurate representation of what he may have experienced while he's sitting here waiting for the sentencing to finish or whatever the proceedings may be between capture and his eventual death.
What happens next is tragic. I think as we read the episode, we read the history, you kind of think they're going to have mercy on him, right? I mean, they're going to feel sorry for him. They're going to say, he rescued, this thief catcher, and you think they'd be merciful, but they're not at all. And after this, they then, quickly then take him and to the execution not long after this time.
Well, actually, it was one day after he was judged and condemned.
Then they take him out, to the execution spot, and then that ends up going from bad to worse. And so, as they put him there, the Martyr's Mirror account talks about this wind that's blowing, and so he's on the fire, and the wind is blowing the fire away from the top of his body. So he's there burning, but it's just excruciating pain, and the wind is keeping him from just consuming and dying, or many of them would have died from smoke or things like that, and he's screaming. And the Martyr's Mirror account gives us that. 70 times over that it was reported they heard him cry out, "Oh my Lord, my God," 70 times screaming. And so this was a hard death, Until finally the bailiff who was working with the castle, and he saw this and he ordered, make this a quick death. And he finally put an end to the misery.
You were talking about not having mercy. This was law, and he had broken the law. And the thief catcher, if he had freed him, would have also been breaking the law and would have been a traitor. And what struck me was the tragedy that someone does something that he should have done, saved a person's life.
Right.
He could have just turned and run, but he did what was right. And the other person wanted to free the person that was saved from his death in the water would have liked to have freed him, but his officer told him to hold Willems. You just have to wonder what was going on in both of their minds. But this illustrates, I think, perfectly the kind of world we live in. It's a world that's tragic because of the fall. And even when you turn to God, there's still tragedy. And I think there was tragedy both for Willems and the man whom he saved.
Also, we know that Dirk was from this town. Even in the old etching, they have kind of an estimate of where he lived. You can see this church, you can see the castle, and you can see kind of where Dirk lived. Small town, small village. So there's a lot built into that turn back that is very human. It's very emotional.
History doesn't really tell us what happens to that thief catcher that he pulls from the ice.
Yeah.
It leaves us with a bit of mystery and reflection of what happened to his story and how would have that affected his life.
Yeah.
You would never forget something like that. So on this series,
Yeah.
Sometimes when we need to go deeper or explain something that isn't location specific, we'll do these, what we call kind of, I don't know, cafe chats or something. We go a little deeper into certain pieces. And we want to start that off here in this first episode of the series to outline a bit of what viewers can expect. One of the things we're emphasizing with this documentary series is going to the places where it happened. What can people expect as they go through this series? What all will we cover?
Well, the movement started in Zurich, and that will be where we start. And we will see how a group of young men became attached to what the scriptures said and eventually started this movement.
So the third episode, the Michael Sattler episode, I'm really looking forward to. So this bases on the life of Michael Sattler, and I've never been to this monastery. So we are going to have an opportunity to go to the monastery where he had his conversion, and where the peasant revolt comes up and he responds to that. And then from there, follow him to where he goes to Strasbourg, and then we're going to follow him to Schleitheim, and that's going to have a lot of great locations, and I'm really looking forward to that one as that plays itself out.
And then we'll go to Rottenburg and dig into Pilgrim Marpeck, a figure we don't talk about very often, and what's going on in the Tyrol. So that's moving a bit into Austria, and from there, where do we go from there?
Don't we go to the Hutterites? Yeah, we see how the movement spreads north and to the east, and one particular group becomes communitarian. They own everything together, and they actually become very successful, prosperous, and mission-minded.
Then we go into Strasbourg and also seeing different places where Michael Hoffman comes in. So we see that we're starting to head now up north, and we spend some days there and look at the different places that he was there in the prison and all those things.
And so from Hoffman, we're tracing that story as it's going up north. What do we cover after that?
Religion and violence, and we have two focuses there. One is the peasant revolt, which started before the Anabaptist movement and lasted till after the movement started. And then in the Munster, we see this movement which starts out peacefully getting derailed, and some of the Anabaptists feeling they need to defend themselves.
Out of the disaster that is Munster, we get this huge figure in the early Anabaptist movement, and that is Menno Simons.
Yeah.
So at that point, we're getting up into the Netherlands, and we'll be telling that story and how he enters the movement from being a Catholic priest, and how he leaves that. We get into his church and film where he had been a priest before he leaves and becomes an Anabaptist.
And then after that is church and persecution. The interesting places that the church met, from barns to hidden churches to caves and everything.
Well, then our last episode is about the Dutch experience, at least in part. And it's interesting. They have a lot of divisions among themselves, but we see their experience of trying to unite, their experience of becoming wealthy and accepted in society, and then what the effects of that are on them as a people.
This is a big story with a wide cast of characters, so many fascinating different people and empires rising and falling, and kings and magistrates and church officials, persecuting these new radicals, these early Anabaptists. There are so many pieces to that story, and we want to do that story justice and give it as much time as it needs to be told. And so this is a fairly long series.
Right.
So if people are watching and say, "Oh, you missed a part," wait, we may cover it later, because there's so much material that we want to communicate as we sit here in Europe and think back 500 years ago. Things look different. What happened? In this 10-part series, we ask one haunting question. Why did Dirk Willems turn back? In the next episode, we'll go to Zurich, 500 years ago, where the first adult baptisms take place in secret. These believers broke from the state church at great risk to their lives. What did they believe that was so disruptive that the state church ordered their imprisonment and execution?